Welcome to the PCOS Society of India online workshop on ovulation induction in PCOS overcoming challenges. We would start with a welcome address by none other than our president, Dr. Dhurusha, who is the director of the Gynac World, the Center for Women's Health and Fertility in Mumbai. She is the founder president of the PCOS Society of India and a founder trustee of Women's Empowerment Foundation. She is the trustee and past president of Mumbai OBGYN Society, chair for Special Interest Group on Reproductive Endocrinology and PCOS at the Aspire. She is the international advisor for the Special Interest Group of ESHRE. She is chair of Indian Special Interest Group, American Society for Reproductive Medicine, and past president of ISAR FOXY and Indian Menopause Society, India. She is also the past director of the Digital Education for International Menopause Society and past chair of the Indian College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. She is the honorary fellow of the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and the first and the only Indian to receive FIGO's Distinguished Merit Award for services towards women's health. I welcome Dr. Dhurusha.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Madhuri, for this kind introduction. And I would like to welcome everyone to this workshop, which we are having virtually. These workshops were originally planned as pre-Congress workshops before the conference, which was going to be held in November. But unfortunately, we could not hold it as a conference, and we are having it as a virtual conference, and hence these workshops have been shifted, and we have been trying to do these workshops as separate programs so that it's not too heavy for people to sit at home and watch everything for 2 or 3 days. And I think this will be more interesting, and it will be easier to sort of focus on, rather than having 1 day of pre-Congress workshops and then 2 days of conference, and it would get too much. So in short, these pre-Congress workshops had been planned earlier, and we had decided to do them, of course, with our faculty. And the plan of our workshop is that we would want it to be very, very interactive. We want to give enough time for discussion, and we have brought in one of the best speakers of this country. We are in the area of fertility, and we also have a very esteemed guest from the US, who is currently the CEO of American Society and Reproduction, and it's none other than Professor Ricardo. So in short, we will have a good program today, and we are going to be speaking on ovulation induction. And this ovulation induction will be held in 3 sessions. One will be the pre-stimulation phase, then is how to get the patient ready for ovulation. The second session is related to ovulation induction itself, and the third session is related to the luteal support phase. So in short, we'll have a great program, I'm sure, and I welcome you all once again, and I would like to thank Madhuri for helping to coordinate and convene this entire session. Thank you very much. So then we could go on to the next session, and that is the session which is the impact of treatment in the pre-stimulation phase. And we have none other than Dr. Madhuri Patil being the opening batsman today for our workshop. And as you all know, Madhuri is the clinical director of Dr. Patil's Fertility and Endoscopy Clinic in Bangalore. And she's also been the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Human Reproductive Sciences, the Journal of the ISAR. And she's been editor for over 9 years now and doing a great job with the journal. She's also associate editor for the Onco-Fertility Journal and founder chairperson of the Karnataka chapter of ISAR. She's recently been invited to join the editorial board of the Endocrine Society Journal for the next 2 years, and that's one prestigious feather in her cap. Endocrine Society Journal is a very, very well-known, impactful journal, and the fact that she's on its editorial board is something to be proud of. She's also the vice president and founder member both of our PCOS Society of India and the Fertility Preservation Society of India. She's done a whole lot of work during this COVID time by conducting huge number of, being the convener for a whole lot of courses which we have done through ICOG and through the Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, and a whole lot of educational programs. She's member of International Reproductive Medicine Research Network, and everyone knows her very well for the work she has done and the written articles which she's had. So over to you, Madhuri, waiting for your talk.
Thank you, Duru, for that introduction. And today I would be speaking on the impact of treatment in the pre-stimulation phase. So all of us know that PCOS today affects almost 1 in 10 of the women, and of them, about 30 to 40% of them are infertile, and about 5 to 10% require an IVF cycle. The chronic anovulation seen in PCOS is basically related to the extra-ovarian factors like increase in insulin, increase in the DHEAS levels, dyslipidemias, plus there could be increase in the LH and decrease in the FSH levels, and certain intra-ovarian factors which govern the folliculogenesis. Because of the biochemical, metabolic, and endocrine changes which are seen in the PCOS, which result in the high androgen levels, basically because of obesity as well as insulin resistance, and increase in the LH levels because of increase in plasma estrone, result in stimulation of ovarian stroma by the LH cells, resulting in anovulation. And this in turn then results in reproductive impairment in women with PCOS. And when subjected to controlled ovarian stimulation, they have an unpredictable response. The response may be slow. There could be hyperresponse resulting in ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. There could be risk of cyst formation, poor oocyte quality, increased incidence of miscarriage, as well as there also could be cycle cancellation. The baseline difference basically between the control ovarian stimulation for ART in the PCOS and non-PCOS is that in PCOS, probably we require lifestyle modification before IVF is initiated. We may also require certain adjuvants or pre-treatment drugs, and the protocols, the type and the dose of gonadotropins used and the trigger is quite different from them in the non-PCOS group. There are certain patient characteristics like age, ovarian reserve, lifestyle risk factors, metabolic, endocrine, and immune mechanisms, and the clinical protocols as well as the performance of that particular clinic, which will determine the success of ART. And for this, we may require complementary interventions to correct the possible pathogenic mechanisms like lifestyle intervention to decrease the risk of chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, genetic and epigenetic mechanisms, and adjuvant therapies like insulin sensitizers for metabolic abnormalities, adjuvant therapy for endocrine abnormalities like thyroid dysfunction and hypoandrogenemia. And we also need to improve the environment in which the gametes mature and embryos implant. Though this is a very busy diagram, but we can see that all the lifestyle factors can have an adverse association between age, smoking, and weight, which reduces the fertility, and there's a risk of impaired fertility. And therefore, couples wanting to conceive should be advised to attempt pregnancy before the female partner reaches the age of 35 or earlier, and also stop smoking and maintain a healthy weight. And this is because obesity is associated with ovulatory dysfunction, reduced ovarian responsiveness to the ovulation induction drugs, alter oocyte as well as endometrial function, low birth rates, and increased risk of maternal and fetal complications during pregnancy. And weight loss increases the ovulation frequency, increases the pregnancy rates, sensitivity to ovulation induction drugs, and along with that, it reduces the androgenic symptoms and also risk of diabetes mellitus and gestational diabetes mellitus. Apart from obesity, the other lifestyle risk factors like smoking and alcohol also result in chronic low-grade oxidative stress with decrease in the oocyte quality, fertilization rate, IVF pregnancy success, and live birth rate per cycle with increased risk of pregnancy loss. And here you can clearly see that the pregnancy rates are significantly higher in patients who do not smoke, who do not drink, and who consume less amount of caffeine. And here we can clearly see that as the BMI increases, the relative risk of infertility also increases. And in this group, where there is a lot of stress in patients, when they are subjected to counseling and support, we can see that the ART pregnancy rate significantly increases as compared to those who are not counseled. And therefore, identifying stress and counseling them is very, very important. So in the lifestyle, we need to avoid junk food and eat healthy, include physical activity in our routine, sleep adequately and at a proper schedule, and also de-addiction in those who have addictions. And these lifestyle interventions improve the egg and the endometrium, improving the reproductive treatment outcome, reducing the obstetric and neonatal complications, and they also prevent environment-driven epigenetic effects across the multiple generations, and therefore by this, it improves the glycemic results, the androgenic symptoms, as well as the anthropometric outcomes. The second drug which I would like to discuss is the insulin sensitizers. And we know that insulin signaling is relevant to normal reproductive physiology, and insulin resistance plays a role in endocrinology and metabolic profile of the PCOS woman. And it is basically indicated in those women who are resistant to ovulation induction drugs, who have a high AMH value, have ovarian hypoandrogenemia and high LH levels, as well as metabolic dysfunction. And we could treat them either with metformin, myoinositol, or a new drug which is called as incretins. And let us see what is the evidence for each one of them. So these insulin sensitizers basically improve the metabolic function by decreasing the lipid synthesis, gluconeogenesis, and glucose levels, and increasing the sex hormone binding globulin and HDL. They improve the endocrine function by decreasing insulin, the IGF-1 and androgens. They also have an anti-inflammatory effect because they decrease the TNF-alpha and CRP, and they have an anti-angiogenic effect by decreasing the VEGF, and therefore their role in decreasing the incidence of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So metformin can optimize an IVF cycle by improved recruitment and improved follicular responsivity with yield of more mature eggs with improved fertilization, implantation, and live birth rate. It also minimizes the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, multiple pregnancies, miscarriage, GDM, preeclampsia, microsomia, and preterm delivery. So if you look at the Cochrane evidence for use of metformin, so in 2014, it was said that there was no difference in the live birth when we used metformin in both agonist and antagonist protocol, but it significantly decreased the incidence of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, more so in an agonist protocol than in an antagonist protocol. And therefore, they concluded that probably it does not improve the clinical pregnancy rate and live birth rate, but definitely decreases the risk of OHSS in a long GnRH agonist cycle. After that, there was another paper which was published in Human Reproduction in 2016, where they just gave a short course of metformin for about 7 days prior to the stimulation. And they found that there was no difference in the incidence of OHSS, but it definitely reduced the live birth rate. And therefore, a short-term metformin does not help, and probably it has to be started at least 2 to 3 months prior to the IVF cycle. These were other two studies which looked at the effect on the AMH, and we can see that in patients who are hyperinsulinemic, there was definite decrease in the AMH values after 6 months, and this was published in JCM. And there was another paper which was from India and published in the JHRS, which showed that after 3 months of metformin, they found reduction both in the AMH as well as antral follicular count. After that, in 2017, Cochrane review said that no, metformin increases the live birth rate, but only in those patients who are taking gonadotrophins for ovulation induction, and it did not have any effect on the multiple pregnancy rate or on the ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And therefore, the ESHRE guidelines said that routine use of metformin is not recommended, especially in GnRH antagonist protocols. But according to the PCOS international guidelines, it is definitely beneficial in increasing the clinical pregnancy rate and reducing the risk of OHSS when an agonist protocol is used. But it also said that it could have a potential effect even in women who are on antagonist protocol, wherein they would reduce the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. It has also been seen that metformin could have a benefit on the oocyte granulosa cell complex, and it results basically in improved mitochondrial function with improved oocyte and embryo quality. And this is basically because of improvement both in the ovarian hypoandrogenism and hyperinsulinemia, which then optimizes the follicular growth and oocyte development with a beneficial effect on the oocyte quality, improving the fertility, optimizing the follicular responsiveness to gonadotrophins, and enhancing the pregnancy outcome with IVF. Coming to inositols, it has been seen that when it's used in the ratio of 3.6 to 1, that is of myo and dithyro, there is a definite increase in the clinical pregnancy rate, live birth rate, and ovarian hyperstimulation, a decrease in the OHSS rate. But according to the international guidelines, it is still considered as experimental till further evidence is obtained. This is a new insulin sensitizer called as incretins, which is a glucagon-like peptide 1. And basically, it can have an effect on the ovaries and endometrium, but it decreases the weight and increases the GnRH. And therefore, its action on the ovaries is that it decreases the androgens, increases the SHBG, reverses the PCO morphology, and decreases the inflammation. Whereas in the endometrium, it decreases fibrosis as well as the inflammation. And this paper, which was published in 2008, has shown that the pregnancy rate and the cumulative pregnancy rate was higher when incretins were used along with metformin as compared to metformin alone. And in 2009, they also concluded that it is a promising treatment for diabetes as well as obesity-related infertility, but further studies are required on the same. We also know that there is an interplay between the thyroid gland and the gonadal axis, and it is important for a normal reproductive physiology, and subclinical hypothyroidism at times is associated with less than optimal pregnancy outcomes, and there is benefit of treatment which far outweighs the risk of treatment with thyroxine, and the thyroid autoimmunity adds to the subclinical hypothyroidism because it is also associated with adverse pregnancy outcome, and therefore the pregnancy outcome may be optimized with thyroxine supplementation. And basically it should be given at the TSH level of more than 2.5, and probably a lower threshold can be considered in presence of thyroid antibodies, thyroid nodules, and when there's a family history of thyroid disorders, and usually the dose is anywhere between 25 to 50 micrograms per day. We also know that PCOS women are more susceptible to OHSS, and therefore, according to both the ESHRE as well as the international guidelines, a GnRH antagonist protocol is recommended for improving the safety as well as efficacy of treatment. Though it has an advantage of shorter duration of stimulation, low gonadotrophin requirement, and decreased incidence of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, and it also, we know, allows agonist trigger with segmentation protocols. But the disadvantage is that we can see that there is a lot of asynchronous development of the follicles, and this is because of the variable FSH levels which are seen in an antagonist protocol, and therefore a pre-treatment may be necessary, basically for synchronization of the follicular development, prevention of occurrence of early large follicles, prevention of spontaneous LH surge, reduction of cyst formation, and also for scheduling of IVF cycles. And the drugs included are estrogens, progesterone, combined OCPs, and GnRH antagonists. So with the estrogens, it was seen that more oocytes are retrieved, but there was no difference in the pregnancy rate when it was used in the previous cycle. But this was another paper after 2017, which was published in 2018, and it showed that there was no difference either in the oocyte retrieved as well as both the pregnancy rates. And therefore, according to the ESHRE guidelines, it's not recommended in improving the efficiency as well as the safety of ART cycle. Coming to progesterone, it reduced the incidence of cyst formation, but there was no difference in the oocyte retrieved as well as the pregnancy rates, and therefore it is not recommended for improving the efficacy and safety. And they also, Farquhar et al. Also looked at the combination of progesterone and estrogen, and they found that there was no difference either in the live birth rate or in the number of oocytes retrieved, and therefore should not be used. When we talk about combined oral contraceptive pills, there's no difference in the ovarian cyst formation or the oocytes retrieved or in the pregnancy rate, but it definitely prevents the asynchronous development of the follicles. And in this paper in 2018, it was seen that there was again no difference in the pregnancy rates when the OCPs are used. And the ESHRE guidelines say that it should not be recommended in an antagonist cycle because of the reduced efficacy when COC is used. When we talk about antagonists, most of the studies are in poor responders, and what I could find was only one study in patients of PCOS. And though there was higher recruitment of follicles and no OHSS, and it was seen that the pregnancy rates were 42 versus 33%, but this did not reach the statistical significance. They also tried the use of antagonists with estrogens. And with this, though there was no benefit on the pregnancy rate, it was seen that with the luteal phase use of antagonists, the length of stimulation and the dose of gonadotropins required was significantly higher than the standard antagonist protocol. But this paper by Lee et al. In 2018 said that no, there was a benefit even in the live birth rate when both estrogen and antagonists were used. But according to the ESHRE guidelines, antagonist pretreatment before COS in a delayed start gonadotropin protocol is probably not recommended. I've just added these two slides because there's a new drug which is called as digarelix, and it is a long-acting antagonist, and which is usually given on day 24 of the previous cycle, and it has its action till the day of trigger. And it has been shown that it results in an effective downregulation of the pituitary. And this paper, which is a preliminary, the paper which has been published has shown increase in the cumulative as well as the ongoing pregnancy as well as the live birth pregnancy rate. But much more studies are needed for dosing and efficacy and safety of this drug. The last part of my talk consists of scheduling of IVF cycles, where it is known that estrogens or progesterones are widely used for scheduling purpose. And this is acceptable given the data on efficiency as well as safety of using these drugs. And it has been observed that when the gonadotropins are started on Friday or Saturday, it had the least probability of a weekend pickup. Short two slides on the new non-pharmacological interventions, which include nutritional supplementations like N-acetylcysteine, omega-3 fatty acids, inositols, and vitamin D, and alternative medical therapies like Chinese herbal medicine and acupuncture. So this paper, which was published in 2019, and it was a systemic review looking at the non-pharmacological interventions in PCOS women, it showed that N-acetylcysteine, inositol, as well as addition of alternative medicine to ovulation induction showed preliminary potential to improve fertility. The lifestyle interventions reduce hirsutism, and inositol lifestyle interventions and acupuncture may improve the glycemic outcomes. And also there is some evidence in reduction of the BMI, but the strength and evidence is very, very low or very low for all outcomes. So they said, concluded that further methodological rigorous and adequately powered primary studies are necessary for each of these pharmacological interventions. And therefore, pre-treatment therapies before control ovarian stimulation may be helpful in improving the outcome in women with PCOS, because lifestyle interventions improve the glycemic results, the androgenic symptoms, as well as the anthropometric outcomes. The adjuvant metformin has resulted in a better outcome as in relation to clinical pregnancy rate, live birth rate, and has decreased the incidence of ovarian hyperstimulation as well as the cancellation rates in an IVF cycle. Correction of thyroid dysfunction again is very essential for the optimal outcome. Pre-treatment with estrogen, progesterone, combined OCPs antagonists suppress or reduce the LH and or FSH secretion prior to gonadotrophic stimulation in IVF. And this synchronization of, and thus result in synchronization of follicular development, prevention of occurrence of early large follicles or spontaneous LH surge, and reduction and result in reduction in cyst formation. Pre-treatment for scheduling IVF cycles also can be used just to avoid work on weekends and holidays. I thank you all for a patient hearing.
Thank you so much, Madhuri, for this very, very informative talk. And we will now invite questions from the audience. We already have one question which has come in from Prashant Adiga, who has asked, what are the indications of pre-treatment in IVF cycles? And secondly, do all antagonist cycles need pre-treatment?
Yeah, so basically pre-treatment, especially in the presence of obesity, thyroid dysfunction is a must because we know that it definitely improves the ART outcome. But when we talk about pre-treatment in antagonist cycle, it probably may be helpful because many a times, at least in my practice, I've seen where I have used the antagonist, especially in both in normoresponders as well as PCOS women. Many a times what happens is we have an asynchronous development of follicles. So either we need to forego the early developing follicles and use the second cohort which has started developing, or if you use the first cohort which has started developing, that is the early large follicles, and probably the number of oocytes what you get would be much lesser than if we would have had a normal FSH and LH level before starting the stimulation. Because what happens in an antagonist cycle where we have not pre-treated it, so you have variation in the FSH and LH levels. One is because there is increase in the FSH in the intermenstrual period. So certain follicles start developing. And then once we get the period, the FSH level decreases. And those follicles which are having a higher threshold level, they will stop growing and they become apoptotic. Then we start the gonadotrophins. Once we start the gonadotrophins, the follicles again start increasing in size. But when again we add the antagonist, there's decrease in the FSH level. And this decrease in the FSH level again will result in apoptosis of those follicles which have a slightly higher FSH values. And therefore, we have an asynchronous development. And this may lead to aspiration of lesser mature oocytes, and we would have a number of immature oocytes when we do the oocyte retrieval.
Yeah, so I think that was very well explained. And there is one more question on whether when we talk about all the advantages of metformin, there are many people who cannot tolerate metformin and we need to give them something else, like say inositols. And now you have talked about something called incretins. So question is that what should we use? Does inositol help as much? Do they act as well as metformin? Do they have their own problems? Or are they better or are they good enough? Number one.
Yeah.
The question is about incretins. Have they already been used?
Yeah, they're not available in India, but they're being used abroad. And coming to inositol, there was only one study, a review article, which was published by Rafal et al. And what he said that though there was improvement in the maturation of the oocytes when inositols were used, but this was not converted into an increase in the clinical pregnancy rate or a live birth rate. Moreover, though, we know that inositols are basically nutritional supplements, and most of the studies which have been conducted on inositols are having a very small number of subjects. And therefore, the evidence for its use is still not good. It's very, very low quality. It's of a very, very low strength evidence. And therefore, even the international guidelines have said that it is still experimental. But in patients who do not tolerate metformin, probably you could try using inositols, but we really require further evidence. And if you look at the ESHRE guidelines, there's not even a mention about inositols when we're talking about the IVF cycles.
Yes. But in our PCOS guidelines, there is a mention about inositols are
Yeah,
problematic.
but they said it's experimental evidence. That's what I saw.
Experimental evidence, and probably the fact that they've included it in their guidelines, probably they are thinking of it as a promising alternative to
Yes.
metformin. The other question is related to the thyroid gland. We normally have results of patients' TSH values between, say, zero point 0.5 to 4.5, a range. But when we as infertility specialists, or even women who are, obstetricians who are treating, pregnant patients, we feel that we need to have a TSH level of less than 2.5. What is the reason for that?
Basically, because it has been seen that the thyroid the low thyroid levels, that is basically it's more so the T3 level. Basically, it has its action on the granulosa cells. So when the thyroid levels are low, it has been seen that there is an abnormal granulosa cell function, and therefore the estradiol levels also can be affected. And with that, we can also have an abnormal maturation or abnormal follicular genesis. And therefore, it is said that we should maintain the TSH levels at 2.5. And especially, there are even some patients wherein we have normal TSH levels, but there is still an elevated TPO. And it has been seen that in patients who have an elevated TPO, apart from increased risk of first trimester abortions or miscarriages, there's also an increased incidence that the pregnancy rates are much lower in this group of patients. So if you have a normal TSH with an abnormal TPO, still it's beneficial to treat these patients with a very small dose of thyroxine of 12.5 or 25 micrograms.
Yeah, but that's so difficult to do in practice, because whenever we do it, there is so much objection, either from the patients or from the patients' relatives or from the doctors who are treating them. And therefore, yes, this is something which I think everyone needs to know, where we try to bring the TSH down to less than 2.5. And if you do have thyroid antibodies positive, do you tend to give them any low dose aspirin or any such products?
No, basically, what I do is in patients who have a TPO positive, once they conceive, basically, we can add aspirin, and probably we can also add low molecular weight heparin, and it has helped in those patients who have had multiple pregnancy loss in the first trimester.
Right.
Actually, I do thyroid antibodies in all my patients.
Yes, I think most of us tend to do that. Okay, the other question is about timing of the cycle, especially when you have batch cycles. We tend to either give them estrogen or progesterone or OC pills prior to starting a cycle. And do you find any difference in, based on what you have used in your practice? Do you feel it makes a difference to the stimulation protocol or to anything?
I think it could make, because I basically never do a batch IVF. So I do regular cycles. So I would really not know what difference it makes. But at times I've seen, because I did go to one center where I hardly went for 2 or 3 months, because I had established a clinic for them. And what I thought is, if you're using a GnRH agonist cycle, there's no problem in doing batch IVF. But only problem is that what happens is you require a more dose of gonadotrophins, because probably you're giving the GnRH agonist for a longer time. But in an antagonist cycle, to schedule the cycle, basically we can use only the estrogens, progesterone, or COPs. But it has been seen that when this is again used, especially in an antagonist cycle, more so the COCPs than the estrogens and progesterones can affect the oocyte yield and the quality. But you can just use for about 10 days. If you use the estrogens and progesterone, it results in a better outcome in these patients. And therefore, most of the evidence or the papers which are published say that it's best to use estrogen and progesterone rather than use combined oral contraceptive pills.
So I think there is one more last question, which is related to Degarelix, the long-acting antagonist. I'm sure it's been created for better, convenience for women who have to take daily injections. And also, just like we have the long-acting FSH available, etc., I think it's going to be something which will be pretty useful for women.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it would be.
In India, we have not used it, right? But
I
probably.
think, yeah, probably it will be a very good option, especially in our PCOS women, because we have this problem of asynchronous development, and many a times we get a lot of immature follicles. So if you have suppressed, if just giving one single injection in the previous cycle, probably it will definitely help us in having a more optimal IVF outcome.
Absolutely. So I think there are no more questions coming in, but at this point in time, since Dr. Sadhna Desai is here, ma'am, would you like to ask Madhuri any question?
Jatin also is
Or would
there.
you like to add anything to the discussion?
Madam, please unmute yourself. Madam, unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you.
So I think, Madhuri, you have covered this subject extremely well. But only one comment I would like to make. See, the general things which we talk about what should be the pre-treatment and all, we must remember that in polycystic ovary, quite a few patients have irregular periods. So if you just tell them if they are from not from Mumbai and they have to come from somewhere, they don't know when they are going to get their period. And so it becomes extremely difficult for you to call them. So what I suggest, you should bring on the, as we do for all amenorrheic patient, before you do induction of ovulation, you can give them the microdose progesterone or the tablet orally progesterone and bring on the period so they can come in time. Because this is standard for induction of ovulation, not for IVF, but for IUI also.
Yeah, but there are many studies which have come in wherein if they just do a scan in women and they see that the endometrium is thin and there are multiple follicles, there's no corpus luteum, and they just do a pregnancy test and they don't even wait for the periods to come. So they start stimulation at any point of time, especially in women with PCOS. But if we have like for our Indian societies, probably for them it is probably engraved that they should get their periods before they take treatments. So probably in such patients, probably we can use progesterone. So we can just give norethistron is the best because it does not result in high levels of progesterone on day 2 of the cycle. Because we know that if you have a high progesterone on day 2 of the cycle, it can result in premature secretory changes in the late follicular phase and can hamper the pregnancy rates. So probably it's best that we can use norethistron. It's much better than medroxyprogesterone. Probably we can give it from day 16 to 25 of the cycle or day 21 to 25 of the cycle. So within 3 or 4 days, she might have an withdrawal. But it's very essential before we start to see the endometrial thickness, because these patients at times also have a very thin endometrium. So if there's a thin endometrium, just your progesterone is not going to help or result in a withdrawal. And therefore, probably we'll need to give a combination of both estrogen as well as progesterone.
So thank you very much. I think we are done with this session, and I'll request Madhuri. Thank you very much, Madhuri, for this excellent talk. I'd like you to introduce our next speaker, and then we can take it.
I would now invite none other than Dr. Sadhna Desai, who is one of our most senior IVF consultants, who is going to talk to us on optimizing controlled ovarian stimulation protocols in PCOS. She is the Emeritus Professor of Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology of Bombay Hospital, Institute of Medical Sciences, honorary physician to the Governor of Maharashtra, visiting consultant to Breach Candy Hospital, and Shri H.N. Reliance Foundation Hospital. She is the director of the Fertility Clinic and IVF Center, Mumbai, past president of ISAR as well as of FOXI. I request Dr. Sadhna Desai to speak.
Stranger.
I think she's logged out.
They put up Dr. Jatin Shah.
No, no. He was there. Madam is logged out by mistake, I think.
Okay. So should
No,
you?
I'll just ring her up.
I'm calling her. Don't worry.
You're calling?
Yeah. She's disconnecting.
Hi, Guru.
Yes. Hi, Sonia. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to Yeah.
It's a very funny meeting, but then at least we are meeting.
No?
Yes. Absolutely.
Hello, madam?
Yeah. Yes.
No, because your talk, na? Yeah, you've gone out, madam. You need to log in again.
Hello.
Hello.
Share your slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah, you need to put it on slideshow.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, fine.
Sorry, because I don't know how I went out of the whole thing. Anyway, before I begin my talk, I would like to thank Dr. Madhuri Patil and Dr. Durusha for inviting me to join this workshop. The ovarian stimulation is a very important step in IVF treatment. And if we optimize the ovarian stimulation, we do get best pregnancy rate. The ovarian stimulation of the causes multiple oocytes to develop so that we get more embryos and we can select the best embryo for transfer to get an optimum pregnancy rate. The question is, how many oocytes one should get to get the best pregnancy rate? If we see the literature, there are many studies which say that more the oocytes we get, better is the pregnancy rate. However, if we get more than 15 oocytes, there is increased risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And we know that the purpose of IVF is to give pregnancy to the woman without putting her life or her child to be born's life in danger. So ideally, we should get 10 to 15 oocytes to get an optimum pregnancy rate. Unfortunately, the optimum medication required for ovarian stimulation in IVF is not universally agreed upon and is likely to be based on individual patient characteristics like the age of the woman, her BMI, her AMH and AFC level, her previous response in the previous IVF cycle, etc. Therefore, at a fixed given dose of gonadotropins, we observe three types of ovarian responses: normal response, hyper response, or poor response. And we find that AMH and AFC are the best predictors of ovarian response to gonadotropins. Now, the hyper responders, it is found that gives the best pregnancy rate because they produce more oocytes, there are more embryos, there are more supernumerary embryos for freezing, and it shortens the time period from stimulation to the pregnancy. However, these hyper responders also increase the incidence of OHS, is maximum in this group of patients. And we know PCOS women are hyper responders. However, PCOS women, although they are hyper responders, they are slightly difficult to manage than rest of the hyper responders because there is not only problem of ovarian hyperstimulation, but also a problem of oocyte maturity. We find that PCOS women are heterogeneous group of women with different phenotypes. Some are hyperandrogenic, some are normal androgenic, some are thin, some are obese, some have regular menstrual cycle, and some are amenorrheic. So when gonadotropin is given to them, some show resistance to ovarian stimulation and others show exaggerated response. Therefore, as Dr. Madhuri Patil has shown, the underlying metabolic and endocrine disorder play a very important role on response to ovarian stimulation in the polycystic ovarian patient. Now, there are some studies in the literature where they say that ovarian stimulation in PCOS produces poor quality of oocytes and poor embryo quality. However, in 2013, SAT conducted a retrospective analysis of ART in PCOS women, and they compared with tubal factor of infertility in a very large number of 42,286 cycles. And they found that both the clinical pregnancy rate as well as the live birth rate in PCOS women were far more than the tubal factor of infertility, suggesting that if the proper stimulation protocol is given, understanding the underlying metabolic and endocrine problems in PCOS, the pregnancy rate is quite good in this group of women. So therefore, although Dr. Madhuri Patil has already talked about this metabolic and endocrine disorder, I would like to re-emphasize 2 or 3 points when managing ovarian stimulation in PCOS. 50% of PCOS women are obese. And we all know that when obese patients undergo IVF, they require higher dose of FSH. There are fewer mature follicles. There is higher cancellation cycle and reduced clinical and live birth rate and increased pregnancy complication due to gestational diabetes, hypertension, and preterm deliveries and stillbirths. Also, what is found is that when there is obesity, there is increased miscarriage rate. A nice study was published in Reproductive Healthcare in 2016, where they compared the pregnancy loss with the weight of the woman. In those women who had lost their pregnancy following IVF and had euploid embryo transfer done by after PGS. And they found that even after transferring euploid embryo, if the patient is obese, she has a higher chance of losing the baby. However, we all know that it's very difficult to lose weight. And therefore, the health benefit to postpone pregnancy for weight loss must be balanced against the risk of declining fertility with advanced age. The next is phenotype and the response of the ovary to ovarian stimulation. In 2018, in gynecological endocrinology, a small study was carried out in 44 PCOS women in 77 cycles. And what the authors found that if the patient was typically PCOS with all ovarian dysfunction, PCO ovary and ovarian hyperandrogenism, there were more number of follicles, more number of E2 at the time of trigger, and there was more risk of OHSS. And they recommended GnRH agonist as a trigger. However, those women who have phenotype B, that means non-PCO, PCOS, these girls required higher dose of gonadotropins. So one must try and give the dose of gonadotropin irrespective of phenotype of the woman as well. In 2017, while surveyed the pregnancy complication in the PCOS women. And what they found that there was increased incidence of gestational diabetes and small for date babies being born in hyperandrogenic PCOS, they fell pregnant than in normal androgyny. And they thought that because the hyperandrogenic women are more insulin resistant, and that is why there may be increased incidence of gestational diabetes. So the next question was, if the woman has insulin resistance and
I think we have lost Sadhna Desai. Seems her Wi-Fi is not great. Should we go ahead with the next talk till she gets sorted out? Can we ask someone to call her up, please? Oh, you've called her. You're muted, Madhuri.
Yeah, I've called her. She's joining. I think her internet connection isn't good.
We could ask her to talk without the video.
Madhuri, ask her to post email the video to you or the presentation. We can upload it from here and she can talk.
I think we could just have some discussion in the meantime till Dr. Desai comes in. She made a mention of phenotype B patients using a high dose of gonadotropin for stimulation. Anyone would like to comment on that?
Or I didn't get, what did you say?
You mentioned about phenotype B
Huh.
PCO patients requiring a higher dose of gonadotropins.
Actually, it's on the contrast. It's the phenotype A which requires more dose as compared to phenotype B.
Yeah, but probably phenotype B is more hyperandrogenic.
Yeah.
It could be possible that they require higher doses. So, question is with PCOS, I think there's a lot to be discussed. There's a lot of controversy, a lot of confusion over whether this is right or wrong. Just as you spoke with metformin in 2014, they said something else.
Yes.
2017, it's something else. Someone else said something else. So we are still trying to come to a conclusion with many of the products we use for PCOS. And with gonadotropins, I agree that the more obese the patient, we do require a higher dose, and also with the hyperandrogenic patients.
Come back.
Yeah. Dr. Desai is back.
Is it possible? I'm so sorry. I'm just causing all this
Just
problem.
put it on the slideshow, madam.
Yeah. Okay, can you hear me? Is it possible to hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Sorry, so it is found that when you give metformin to hyperinsulinemic patients, there is definitely decreased ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome and possibly slightly increase in the pregnancy rate. I had already spoken to you about the phenotypes of the patient and the next comes is the anovulatory patients. Whenever the woman is a case of secondary amenorrhea or severe oligomenorrhea, and she requires the IVF and induction of ovulation, then one has to be slightly different in this group of women. But we have to realize that they are amenorrheic, they are not ovulating. So your gonadotropin dose has to reach the threshold level of FSH required for ovary to respond. Therefore, these patients, when you stimulate, may not show response on the 5th day. And you may have to give stimulation for a little longer period of times before the oocytes mature. So please, after 5 days, don't suddenly increase the dose of the gonadotropins if patient is pakka and ovulatory. So there is a need of counseling to the patient before we take them on ovarian stimulation. We must talk to the patient and tell her that she may not respond well and then we may have to cycle cancellation. She may over-respond and she may require even hospitalization, that we may freeze her embryos, may transfer it in the next cycle, and she requires a very close supervision. And if she can reduce weight in case she is obese, she will have a better chance to become pregnant. There are some common points of PCOS women, although they are individually different. There are certain common characteristics of all PCOS women, that when you give gonadotropins to PCOS women, they have higher sensitivity to gonadotropin stimulation. They are prone to multifollicular development. They produce 2 to 3 times more follicles and eggs than normal responders, and have a higher steroid production and have a higher risk of ovarian hyperstimulation. And it is found that the incidence of moderate to severe OHSS in PCOS women is 5 to 16%, quite a high incidence. So whenever you are doing ovarian stimulation for PCOS women, we have to consider efficacy versus safety. Now, there are many guidelines today available for ovarian stimulation in PCOS by different fertility societies, including PCOS Society and international societies. And more or less all of them agree on the dose of gonadotropins to be given, the type of gonadotropins to be used, protocol for down regulation, type of ovulation trigger, and steps to prevent OHSS, namely close monitoring and adds on, etc. So in nutshell, the standard stimulation protocol should be as follows. Use gonadotropin preparation wherever fine tuning of the dose is possible. That means use a multi-dose vial or a pen. It doesn't matter if you give recombinant FSH or you give highly purified FSH or you give highly purified HMG. The results in terms of pregnancy are the same. Whatever you are more comfortable, please use it. But I just came across one study called as Megaset HR trial, published in this year in April in Fertility Sterility, where a good study has been carried out comparing the results of the highly purified menogen versus recombinant FSH in GnRH antagonist protocol. And these authors found that although the pregnancy rate is same, there was a decreased ovarian hyperstimulation and decreased pregnancy losses in women who received HMG instead of recombinant FSH. Now, this was the study on hyperresponders, including PCOS, and not on PCOS women itself, but it was a very interesting study, and you should read that study. I think it is a very impressive study. Secondly, you should be very gentle in stimulation and use a low dose protocol. If the standard protocols is 150 international unit of FSH or HMG, whatever you are using, but if the patient is very obese or she is having non-PCO PCOS, then give a higher dose, otherwise she will not respond. And do strict monitoring of the stimulated cycle with both estrogen and by sonography. Always it is advisable to use GnRH antagonist protocol instead of GnRH agonist protocol. Not that the pregnancy rate is different in both the group, but when you use GnRH antagonist protocol, there are less gonadotropin use and there are less oocyte than agonist protocol, and there is a less chance of ovarian hyperstimulation by 39 to 46% less. And you have a choice. In case patient is getting ovarian hyperstimulated, you can use GnRH agonist instead of HCG to trigger the ovulation. Secondly, when you are monitoring the cycle very closely, you should watch out for signs of early ovarian hyperstimulation and suspect ovarian hyperstimulation if you find more than 25 follicles or E2 levels going more than 3,500 picogram per ml, In that case, you suspect that this patient is going to have ovarian hyperstimulation. And therefore, you should take precaution that she should not get ovarian hyperstimulation. Even if you get more than 15 oocytes, you should consider that she is getting ovarian hyperstimulation. So in this women, avoid HCG trigger in GnRH antagonist cycle because HCG has longer half-life, results in sustained LH-like activity, results in stimulation of LH receptors on multi-corpus luteum, leading to multiple corpus luteum, leading to OHSS. And there are enough studies which say that when you give GnRH agonist trigger, the LH, sustained LH activity is less number of time and there is less ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. Whenever you suspect the patient is likely to get ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, please freeze the embryo in that cycle and transfer it in the next natural cycle because this will cause marked reduction in ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And this is particularly advisable when you have given trigger by GnRH agonist because GnRH agonist trigger causes the very severe luteal phase deficiency. The last is the add-on in ovarian hyperstimulation to prevent ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So if you suspect that E2 levels are very high and if you suspect that you are going to have more oocytes because many follicles are developing, please give cabergoline, dopamine receptor agonist, 0.5 milligram daily from the day of HCG for 8 days. This dopamine receptor agonist causes phosphorylation of VEGF receptors, thereby reducing the capillary permeability by VEGF, which causes ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And there is one study last year where the authors gave cabergoline tablets 0.5 milligram daily from when the follicle was 15 millimeter in diameter because they found E2 level was going more than 300 picogram. They gave HCG trigger in that cycle and they did transfer also in that cycle. And they found the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation was only 1%. This was study of about 126 cases. So cabergoline does help reducing the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So this is in all because I think I've taken a lot of time. So we followed this protocol and by our grace of God, in last 8 years, we have got not a single patient of moderate to severe OHSS requiring hospitalization. And the clinical pregnancy rate at our clinic has remained 54% per patient. This is a cumulative pregnancy rate. Now, I think we are running short of time. Otherwise, there was a nice case to talk, but I think my internet gave me a lot of problem. I'm sorry about that.
Madam, 2 minutes if you want, you can take and then we'll go.
Okay. So there is one case presentation about quality of the oocytes and embryos in polycystic ovary. I had some time ago a young patient of 27 years with PCOS having severe male factor of infertility referred for ART. Patient had first cycle of ICSI cycle from a very good IVF center. She had 27 oocytes, 20 fertilized, and the embryos were frozen, and she had 3 frozen embryo transfer cycles. Patient conceived in the 3rd ET cycle, but she had missed abortion due to trisomy 21. Husband and wife's karyotypes were done, which was normal. So in the 2nd cycle, the patient was given GnRH antagonist protocol like before. Patient got 38 oocytes, 18 got fertilized. So the doctor decided to do PGS because she had that last miscarriage was because of trisomy 21. And they found out of 18 embryos, 16 were abnormal. So only 2 were normal embryos that were transferred. Patient didn't conceive. So patient was advised that she has bad quality of oocytes and must undergo IVF with egg donation. Patient didn't agree. She went to 4 other top good IVF centers in the place from where she was staying, and all of them, when they looked at the report, told her she requires egg donation. She had mental agony because of she didn't agree to egg donation, and she took a psychiatric treatment. And later on, when she saw me, I decided that I will change the protocol. Now I am in long time in IVF field, so I have given enough GnRH agonist cycle in these patients of PCOS. So I decided to give long agonist protocol instead of antagonist, and I gave her a very small dose, only of 112.5 recombinant FSH for 13 days. I got 13 oocytes, 8 got fertilized, 2 blastocysts were transferred, and to my luck, patient became pregnant. She stayed back in Bombay till she had a baby, and then she went back. So what I wanted to tell, that never get discouraged if you get bad oocytes one time. You should try and find out what you should do to change the treatment so that you get a better quality of eggs. Thank you.
Madhuri, you're muted.
Yeah, madam, can you stop sharing the slides?
Yes.
Madam, there's a question which says as to how would you adjust the dose of gonadotrophins during stimulation?
What I do?
How do you
is-
adjust the dose of
Correct.
gonadotrophins?
So I always start with 150 IU of recombinant FSH. But if the patient is very obese or she is doesn't have polycystic ovary in ultrasound but is hyperandrogenic and thin, I give her 225 international unit of FSH. I call her on day 5, but if I find that follicles are developing but E2 levels have not gone up, I will wait for another 2 days and call her. And only if there is no response on the 7th day, I will slightly increase the dose by 37.5 international unit. Because these PCOS women are less likely to develop premature LH surge because there is an ovulatory dysfunction. And some of them do have premature LH surge, but I wait for giving antagonists till the follicles are at least 12 to 13 millimeter in size, and I don't start very early GnRH antagonist in this group of women.
Yeah. The second question is, what are the ways of reducing the basal LH before you start stimulation?
There is very much discrepancy in this raised LH levels because these are chronic raised LH level and they are not going up and down in the same cycle. So it really does not matter. But if the patient is anovulatory and having high LH, I do give them 1 cycle of OC pills before I take them on the program.
How to have a batch IVF in women with PCOS with irregular cycles?
How to have, beg your pardon? How to
Batch,
have what?
batch IVF
Yes.
in women of PCOS with irregular cycles.
So let me put it this way, although there is a lot of controversy of pre-treatment in the cases of normal responders, but in women with PCOS, I don't think that it would matter if you put them on the OC pills and stop them altogether so that you can start stimulation together. I don't do a lot of batch IVFs. I'm not very experienced person, but I think that should be the best way.
Then is PCOS per se an indication for IVF?
What is the indication? PCOS.
No, is PCOS per se an indication for IVF?
No, basically it is not an indication for IVF because you can give low dose gonadotropin if clomiphene or letrozole treatment fails. But if you find that the patient does not with ovulation induction with gonadotropin, patient ovulates but doesn't become pregnant, of course she requires the IVF treatment, because you can't keep on giving her gonadotropin injections again and again and again, because it will not be very cost effective treatment.
Okay. Thank you, madam, for that excellent lecture.